People are strange. Something strange.
Is that strange?
That is strange.
That is strange.
Wow, that is strange. This is strange.
And welcome back to another episode of Strange Sauna Flex. Today, we're talking about that funny money, the dirty Fed. Where did money come from? What is it? Like, why do we like money? What's it all about, man?
Well, before we start, I went to get some gas today at the gas station. I saw these green shades. So these are my money honey shades.
Hell yeah. Funny money,
these
funny
are
money.
money honeys. So funny money. But yeah, I think at the end of last week's show, when we talked a little bit about the golden age and what's coming, and we'll bring that up again towards the end. So you guys got to go back and watch that show.
Yes, indeed.
And I asked you what your opinion was on what's really going to collapse or what's happening with all this, with the aliens and everything. You basically talked about something that kind of got my perked my ears.
Yeah, percolate.
Because we very percolate. And the thing is, we really don't know where money comes from.
Right.
And I think more and more people now are saying, oh, money has no value, it's fake. But just saying it's one thing, understanding why. And this is a show that's deep into, we like to talk about conspiracies and whatnot. There's only one part here that might be slight conspiratorial. The rest is, this is history. This is stuff that should be taught in school, and it's not. And when it is taught, they use cartoons and really weird. Yes.
They make it all like childish. And like I will say this. There are tons of conspiracies when it comes to who is behind the Federal Reserve, the monetary system, the World Bank. Conspiracy theories, though, those are out the window because this is all facts, baby.
This is all facts. And there's a lot. And what I wanted to do was kind of break it down. And I didn't have to talk about each president, just the main characters.
Yeah.
You know, the mob, the cabal, you're going to hear a lot about the main characters. Certain presidents that signed off on it. And you're going to see a pattern here like we do with everything else. There's patterns to everything.
Okay. Yeah, it's you said that you definitely wanted to talk about this because the Alpha and the Omega from the last episode, if you guys haven't gone and listened to that, that was the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight, the symbolism all surrounding that. So much things just intertwined together that makes it look like the monetary system is going to collapse. They're going to bring in something new.
Yeah. And they're going to have to, because after I get through this, and I'll get through it pretty quickly so that we can just watch some videos and we can actually discuss, which I think it's important to discuss where we think this is going. You made some good points last week about, how the U.S. might get out of this. But it's not just the U.S. You have to understand that with the Federal Reserve, that's tied to the U.S., but it's a central bank system that has really enslaved us.
It has.
For a century.
Yep.
We are not, gotta look at the camera with my glasses. We are not free, folks.
We're not. We're slaves.
And we're slaves unless this ends up correcting itself. And I think that is the battle. And if that's
good.
And that's why I thought that they were attacking Trump, is because he was going after this system.
Okay.
I'd rather this be exposed.
I do want to ask you though, like right at the end of this, I want to ask you, like, what do you think is the path forward? So let's save that as a staple for the end. But that's something definitely. I want to keep in the back of my mind is like, how do we get out of this rut?
Well, there's many things that are happening now. And a lot of it's not in the news, which shocks me because it should be, about the US dollar. We'll talk a little bit about the BRICS nations, the gun that Trump's put to their head now, which is very interesting, which we'll talk about as well. And that's not even in my notes. I already know that in my head. I had to just go through all this here. And basically it's like, money just plays a crucial role basically in our lives, our daily lives.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
currency, it allows us to live lives. It gives us security, to some degree, health and comfort for those that are able to, afford health care, because in the States, it's quite expensive. I would also argue that it's really the driving force between good and evil, and it's the evil that we're seeing, and it's the world's gravest, as they would say, the world's gravest ills come from this currency and money, because it's not, money is not the root to all evil, it's the lack of it. And once you have so much of it, what is the next thing in line? And it's power. These people have more money than they can ever spend.
Yeah.
But it's that power and that control.
Well, and then I remember a while ago on Pardon My American, we were talking about how do you control this? How do you cripple the deep state? Is you have to devalue the dollar, because if they have money to pay off people to do whatever the hell they want them to do, they have the power, they have the control, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. But if you take away their power, you take away their money, you stop them, right?
You know, it's the three heads of the snake. You've got DC, which is the military complex, industrial complex. You've got the Vatican, and you've got London, England, the Bank of London, England. So you got the money, religion, and the military complex. So that's the three-headed snake. So like Greg was saying, and what I'm saying today is if that head gets chopped off, the head of the snake, which is the monetary, the corrupt cabal money system, then all hell can break loose. So I'm going to grab a bit of water. If you have alcohol, I'd say start drinking, guys.
Yeah, take a nice sip of that whiskey. I know whiskey shamans out there, so go ahead and do that.
I'm okay. So despite the overwhelming amount of information that's out there, none of this is taught in school. We don't know anything about the money system, how to bank properly. We don't know how to get a mortgage, how to do our own taxes, and very few citizens really don't understand how it's dispersed and the factors that come into play, what determines its value. Yeah, which you'll find out today there is no value.
Well, I mean, some would say that's on purpose. You know what I mean? Like they purposefully don't teach you the monetary system, how to balance a checkbook. I mean, that's super old school nowadays, but like just credit, like how to manage your credit. Every high school student should know all of this.
True. And the thing is, they always tell us about have a good credit score. Meanwhile, every country in the world is in debt, which would mean, and they don't pay their debt in time, which means their credit score would be 0. So it's funny how they tell us we should have a decent credit score. But meanwhile, this is money that's basically IOUs and it's borrowed.
Those hypocrites.
They are hypocrites. There are hypocrites here. So basically like in the early years of the last century, there's been many times they've been trying to bring in a central or a federal bank reserve type situation, because every war that's gone on, even the 1970s, 1980s, the 1770s and the 1800s and the 1900s, it's war that just depletes country of their money. And that's where the financial impact happens. So, we've got like the Federal Reserve Act originally signed by, President Woodrow Wilson in 1913. It was basically put in place to stop this crisis that had happened, I think, half a dozen times. But the last time it happened was the bank run of 1907, which again, all this money was being spent and coming out of wars, they were basically bankrupt, completely bankrupt, right? So it says here the history repeated itself in the early years of the new century with the global financial crisis in 2008. So you can always see there's always this crisis that's happened.
It's like every 20 years or something, or?
Yeah, it's basically even with the fiat dollar, and we'll talk about why the fiat dollar, which is tied to oil, is collapsing, and it needs to reset from scratch it can only go maybe 50 years max. Okay. 50 years max. So we got 1971 when we came off the gold and tied everything to oil. And if you go 50 years, I'm born 75, so I'm 79. No. Is my math. I look pretty good for 79.
Well, hey, 2 + 2 is Jello, like you say.
Yes. So yeah, I'm just gonna get my notes here. So yeah, 1913, Woodrow, signed this in, which is very interesting because it was the year after probably the first false flag I can think of, which was the Titanic. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into it. We'll talk a little bit about it. But basically, what happened with the Titanic set forward with this signing in the 1913 of this act. So on the Titanic, and I sent you a photo, Greg. It was the very last one I sent you.
Yep, I got it right here.
So these three dudes here, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isa Strauss, and Jacob Astor. And by the way, Jacob Astor was like the richest man in the world at the time.
Yeah, wasn't he one of the Illuminati
was.
families?
I don't know. I didn't go into deep as that because this can be a whole show on its own. But like you can say, these men were all worth $11 billion, which was just, unheard of back then. But to tie it into the 1913, before we get into the history of it, these dudes were on the Titanic, sailing from, I believe, England. They were supposed to make it to New York. And as we all know, the Titanic sank. These three guys died, but they all, as you can see here, opposed the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
So they could see what J.P. Morgan and a few other guys were doing, Paul Wahlberg and Benjamin Strong Jr. and Henry P. Davidson, which we'll talk about. These are all the dudes that, took a nice secret train trip to a certain island to pen what now we call the Federal Reserve. But J.P. Morgan and one other gentleman.
That was Jekyll Island, wasn't it?
That was Jekyll Island. We will talk about that as well. So yeah,
weird.
you've got, Miller, Hershey, and J.P. Morgan were supposed to be on the Titanic. And literally that morning they said no. So these three dudes that we just talked about were going to oppose it. And I feel if they did have a chance to oppose it, we may not be in the predicament that we were in right now. Who knows? Because basically the Federal Reserve was brought in to stabilize the currency because many states have different currencies. So every state had its own currency, which I didn't realize. I was like, that's crazy. Up to like 30,000 different currencies.
I mean, it makes sense. And, when you think about like the Wild West, the term redneck comes from a town that was this big businessman who had banknotes or like his own script.
Yes.
It was like called script. And he created his own currency called script that only the people who worked for his company could use the script. He had his own grocery stores, clothing stores, right? And so people wanted money, man. Like they wanted like real money that they could go spend elsewhere. And they fought back. And this was like the first workers' rights movement. And they wore red handkerchiefs around their necks.
Yep.
So they're called rednecks.
Rednecks. The original redneck.
The original.
And there is so much history behind all this. But to make it simple so you guys can just take it in, you'll get pissed. Trust me, you're going to get pissed. Because
I'm pissed already.
I am already. And I was, the last couple of days doing this because I woke up to this before 2020. I kind of was, we've always realized that our government's been shellax with the money or whatever. But it's beyond that because what happens is this Federal Reserve that was signed in 1913, it set the wave. And basically it's a cartel. It's carte blanche, you call it, of print money any way you want out of thin air.
Yeah. That's like the fractional reserve, right? The fractional reserve.
Fractional banking, which we'll talk about. Like literally that's the show. We could stop right now and go, hey guys, money's printed out of air. But we want to explain why, So like, so President Wilson signed away the control of the money supply to basically this cabal. And they basically are a very well organized gang. I mean, this is what these guys were. They're just crooks, extremely organized.
So let me ask you, in your research on this, did you find anything about like his popularity? Woodrow Wilson, was he a liked president?
There wasn't much on it. I kind of feel like because of the panic and the bank run of 1907, through his campaigning, I felt it was like, oh, we need to charter another Federal Reserve, another central bank, because every time a charter ends, there's almost time that it disappears. So they had done this several times with different presidents. And each time they did it, the citizens would be like, fuck you, we're not doing this again. Well, like, but then war would happen, they would lose money. And then you're like, okay, we do have to have a system in place that stabilizes the currency.
Right.
So he was running on that and being like, hey, vote for me and we'll put this in place properly, because again, all this money had been lost in 1907.
Well, because before the Federal Reserve was created, you had like the first Bank of the United States in the late 1700s. And that was
out of
like
New
right
York.
after the Revolutionary War, right around there. Then you had the Second Bank of the United States, and that happened as soon as the charter for the first bank expired. But then that was abolished by like Andrew Jackson. I don't know if you have stuff on this, and you're
I
going
do have a bit on him, on that as well.
Yeah, so
and it's interesting.
Because the Andrew Jackson stuff, like people are comparing Trump to Andrew Jackson. They're saying that, Trump wanted to keep him on the $20 bill. He had a picture of him in his whatever office, right?
Yeah, no, totally. The banks basically from 1907, which was the last time there was this financial depression before the new charter came in. The story behind it, because literally they didn't have enough silver, gold, and coins because they're running out, because war costs money for sure. Many banks went under, millions of dollars being lost. Remember, millions of dollars back in the early 1900s would be billions almost today, right? Like if
or
you look
trillions,
at or trillions evenly. So, to create stability, Wilson signed the Federal Act to stabilize this. And the bit of the backstory, as we know, is the whole Titanic situation. But what's interesting is just around, the night of November 22nd, 1910, the richest, most powerful men were boarding a train in New Jersey. And this train was late at night. They were coming one at a time. The blinds were pulled down. It was very secretive because they didn't want the press, especially out of New York City, to get a hold of this, because they're like, why are these very influential rich men getting together? So we had the private secretary Shelton, Pat Andrew, assistant treasury, Secretary Frank Zander, president of the National City Bank of New York, Henry Pete Davison, who's the senior partner of JP Morgan. You're going to hear JP Morgan throughout this whole thing.
Never ending.
Yeah, never ending. Benjamin Strong Jr., which is associate of JP Morgan and the president of the Bank Trust Corporation, and Paul Warburg, who was the heir to the Warburg Bank family. So you have these dudes all meeting secretly, one at a time. That was my Macho Man impersonation. One on a two, yeah.
Enough is enough, brother.
That's Hulk and Macho going on here.
Whoops.
And they were, they wanted to just attract little attention as possible. And they were told they were going duck hunting. So again, there was their story. We're going, let's kill some ducks. But the train was actually moving. So obviously it was moving, heading towards an island called Jekyll Island, which we've heard about. Very, very famous areas that the Rockefellers, had JP Morgan, all the rich people would go to. So it's kind of like an early version of the, what's the one with the big owl? The one that the Bohemian.
Yeah. Bohemian Grove.
Yeah. So it was sort of, that might've been going on at this time. I didn't get into that, but it was this sort of like, platform that they would go to and try to come out with reform. And here's the thing, any dumb idiot, when they hear the word reform, they're like, oh, reform is good. So they would always use that word reform.
Right.
Especially during crisis.
There's your thumbs up on Zoom,
crisis.
dude.
Yeah,
Woo-hoo.
especially during crisis. That's that's money right there. It's fake confetti.
Yeah. Everybody just listening to this, Flex has an emoji thing wherever he makes a hand gesture on Zoom, it explodes. Something happens.
Yeah. And they knew the banks needed some type of reform. So basically, the Fed was going to come up with some legislation, and these dudes just wanted to get ahead of it. They were smart. They were just the ones that that called for the regulation and wanted to reform it. And, we're all just suckers to anything that's, like when you're here a reform, we're a sucker to it. Yes, please. Maybe not so much now, because I think we're a little bit more awake to all this, but they wanted really to self-regulate this to their own advantage. That's basically it. It's just private guys saying, hey, we know how to handle money because we're millionaires and billionaires, and we know how to handle money, and we can figure out how to do this and work with the government, which is not how it was after they signed in. So again, they kind of pull the wool over our eyes, so the banking cartel wrote their own rules and regulations, and then they passed this law, and it had failed a couple of years before. But what happened was this kind of rewrote it and packaged it differently. Remember last week's show, and you did that little trailer that you just put on all the social platforms. At the very end, I'm saying, do we know the NWO idea is dead and people are caught on to it? So this public relations came in and said, let's repackage it to the new age and the golden age, the new era.
Yep.
So I basically, it's just
they reformed it.
They reformed it, right? It's a reform. So, and Congress gave them the authority to issue the nation's money and gave away the sovereignty rights of money to private banks. Like, that was it. And an interesting fact is Congress can't control these people. The president can't control.
They're not elected, right?
They're not elected. Anyone who comes to Congress, they're just doing testimony, but it's a private company, just like the IRS is a private company.
Yeah.
They have no right to come and take your house and do all this. So,
well, and that's what I heard is it was a brilliant plan. The way that they worded it, Federal Reserve, it has nothing to do with the federal government, even though you have the word federal right in there. And reserve, what kind of reserves do they have? I heard they don't have any reserves, but
no, and we'll talk about that. But good point there, Greg, about how the word reserve, Federal Reserve, had nothing to do with the fact that it's federal. So this actually started, the central bank whole ideology and idea started in the 17th century in Europe. So this is why when we talk about the three heads, you got the City of London, because that's basically where the central bank system started. So with my notes here, they needed basically same thing. There was war. They needed to rebuild their navy. Obviously, they didn't have enough money. The colors were just exhausted. They had nothing left, typically from this war. And there's a Scottish banker called William Patterson had a banking solution, and he proposed basically to form a company that would lend the Bank of England £1 million at 6% plus a 5,000 management fee. Right. And eventually they ended up saying, okay, it's going to be, million, 1.2 million. So basically this dude's like in 1694, the Bank of England was created, and it was right there is a lie, because it wasn't a government entity, even though we just said Federal Reserve had nothing to do federally. Bank of England had nothing to do with England. It was a private bank owned by private people. Sounds very familiar what we're talking about right now, where you're sitting there going like, well, how do they call it the Bank of England? It's just to pull the wool over people's eyes. It had nothing to do with the Bank of England. And so basically,
I just looked this up. The Bank of England is often referred to as the old lady. Yeah, that's just gross.
Yeah, the old lady.
Gonna clean out the old lady. Yeah.
You got to always ask the old lady permission for everything, right?
I guess.
All my friends that are married, like, I got to ask my wife.
That's true.
It's the old lady.
Yeah. Maybe that's where it came from. Got to ask the old lady.
Probably, yeah. In the 1970s, at this point, also going back to that, other countries started to adopt this banking sort of reform, for sure, where they all started their own central bank system. It's basically a blueprint that started from the Bank of England.
Okay, so the Bank of England was like the first one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Bank of England was basically the first one that was the template. I'm pretty sure they had tried other times. I don't know how they did any of the money stuff in medieval times and stuff like that. The immediate Bank of North America, the central bank, issued Congress $1.2 million. So you notice they did the same thing. Bank of England needed money. Here's $1 million at 6% interest with a management fee, while the Bank of North America, which I believe was in New York, a central bank, was basically saying, okay, we're going to issue Congress. So now they're giving the government the same thing. So it's the same blueprint that happened with the Bank of England. The first bank in the United States is chartered in around 1791 and follows the same pattern as the Bank of England, Bank of North America. And it just gave authority, basically, folks. It just gave authority to create money, lend it to the government, and print money out of nothing. Even from day one, just printing money out of nothing. And then, basically using the same banking bosses. It's just the same people that are involved, the Rothschilds, the JP Morgan, they had their hands in all this shit. And and they would have these charters, and it was interesting. And this is where it got really long. And I just said, let me just look at this and just get it down to the bolts, nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
They would write it in as a charter. When the charter expired, the U.S. would go through times where there wasn't a Federal Reserve or a central banking, and I found it interesting how they would say no to it because they kind of would see they didn't like the monopoly that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But then through war, and again, we know that's just, it's scripted through war. Every time there was a war, that's where they're like, we need more money. Well, let's try this Federal Reserve or central bank system again. So it would end, the charter would end, it would disappear for a few years, then would come back again. And each time, I think they just wrote it a little bit better each time.
Well, not only that, I think they used peer pressure, or not peer pressure, but environmental pressures on the public to say, hey, look how miserable your life is without this centralized banking system. Everything's corrupt. You guys don't know where your money's at. You don't know how to exchange. What's the exchange rate? You can't agree on that. I don't know. And then the war aspect, do you think that they're going to plan a war right now to kind of bring in this new monetary system?
Well, they have been.
China's been ramping up.
Yeah,
they used BRICS.
They used the collapse of 2008 to wipe out people, which they needed to do. COVID,
what do you mean?
Huge.
So they wiped out people's money, right?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I lost about $70,000. Some money that my mom had left me when she passed away. I had it in a mutual fund, low risk mutual fund. And mutual funds don't guarantee your initial investment. GICs do. That's what we have up here in Canada, which you get at really ridiculous rates, like 3.5% or 4%. Mutual funds, mutual funds can be 8, 9, 10%. But I had lost $70,000 in the collapse of 2008, and that's when I realized, everyone got bailed out. They bailed themselves out.
Yeah, the banks got bailed out.
Which money they can just print out of air, and then you and I are all paying for it.
Right.
So I haven't put money in a mutual fund since. I have some money in a GIC, but when interest rates came down, which is ooh, you're saving more money in your mortgage, so did my interest rate on my GIC.
Yeah,
so you can never get ahead.
Yeah.
You can never get ahead, But I feel 2008 was one. There's always these mini little crashes. They had one in the 80s.
Yeah, you're saying COVID was one.
COVID was huge because, again, anyone got rich and none of us did it. I'm still trying to crawl out in the sense, rebuild my business. I ended up selling my home and moving across Canada, and I found a place to live.
There's been tons of businesses that shuttered their doors. I mean, you could not work. You could not open your place of work, so you couldn't get customers. And even if you did open, some customers were just too scared to go shopping. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. No, you're totally right. And,
transfer of wealth.
Transfer of wealth was huge. There was a billionaire being made every day during COVID. Yeah. Which is unheard of. Well,
Elon's money tripled or quadrupled during COVID.
Yeah. So heading back to this here, so we got the 1780s. The U.S. is financial turmoil again. The currency to pay war, there it is again, had collapsed over issuing money, too much money. So again, it started to collapse because they were issuing too much money again. And there was a lot of British counterfeiting. So the British figured out how to counterfeit money, so Congress then turns to, at that time, the person who was the big boss, the superintendent of the financial system, Robert Morris, who was a wealthy shipping merchant who just 2 years before was being investigated for war profiteering, but somehow 2 years after that, he's now the superintendent of the financial stuff.
So nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed. Honestly, folks, it's just, I think now we're more aware of it. And I don't know how we get out of it, which we'll talk about, because it's here, it was very easy to kind of hide it. But a century later, and this was actually 1780s, where this Robert dude was yeah, no problem. He basically, got Congress to agree to help out this financial debt, and the first central bank was basically created in the U.S. So the first central bank was the 1780s, was first created in the U.S. Same thing. They got to pay for this war. And this Robert dude's like, I got a great idea. This is what we can do. We have wealthy people and we can help you out. And like, yes, please. You know, it's a handout, right? It's just
well, and
handout.
wasn't the first national bank, it was kind of loan, like someone loaned money. Was it Morgan, JP Morgan, who actually loaned money to the bank?
They were the major contributors, you know, but the first national bank, which is the North American bank, the first central bank, they basically loaned Congress $1.2 million. So they did the exact same blueprint they did with the Bank of London, Bank of England, where they're like, oh, we're going to lend you 1.2 million. It's almost, they asked for the same thing, 1.2 million at 6% with a management fee, whatever that was at that time. And, you know, so the next few decades, the charter would run out, which is we talked about, and they would just renegotiate another central bank. So there were always several central bank systems throughout this time, up until, you know, Andrew Jackson was the first president that basically put it on hold. Like, he just said, we're not allowing this monopoly. There's corruption going on here. I do agree we need a better system, but I don't like what I'm seeing, you know. So, you know, in 1833, they said they would stop using the bank to pay off their debts. And basically that's what happened. Andrew Jackson was the first president, and he ran on the platform, you know, Jackson, no bank. That's how he won.
Right.
You know? That was his platform.
People were desperately trying to reestablish that bank for a long time, right? Just because he got rid of it didn't mean they're not going to keep on trying. You know what I mean?
No, they kept trying. They would rewrite. Again, I think they got better and more cunning and rewrote things. And they basically was just sort of like it was a magic trick. That's why this is part one. This is called the trick. Then we have the scam. And then part three at the end of this is the end with a question mark. So This was the trick. This was the trick. So, you know, you basically, on January 8th, 1835, President Jackson basically had just paid off the entire debt. And if you look, there is a graph that I can send to you, Greg, that shows where for the first time for quite a while, you know, about 77 years,
no
US
debt,
was free of debt.
Yeah.
And now it's at what, 35 trillion?
Yeah, it was at 33 for a while.
Yeah, 33, of course.
Yeah, I've seen that chart. I was like, wow, no debt? How does that work? Andrew Jackson did something.
Yeah, he campaigned on it. And I think every generation you fall for shit. Like, I don't think the next generation will fall for COVID again, right? So something always has to happen for next generation to just shake their head and wake up to it. So, you know, it's about 77 years that passed before they try to regain their jewel, their prize and glory. We have to take this money back. I mean, you got to keep in mind, folks, these are private people. Private stockholders, had nothing to do with the government, even though it said federal, had zero to do with that. And, you know, during that time, they had the real estate family, you had the steel companies, the Vanderbilts, the railroad companies, the Millers, the Rothschilds, which were oil. Well, they wanted to create a new network.
Well, wasn't the Rockefeller oil, or was it Rothschilds too?
Rockefeller, sorry.
Okay.
Did I say Rothschilds?
Yeah. But I mean, it is what it is.
No, good call. It's right in front of me, too.
Okay.
Rockefeller Oil. So they wanted to create a new network. Again, they just wanted to start this again. They're like, we can figure out how to do this. And the head of this venture was G. Pierre Pont Morgan. So we just know them as one of the Morgans, basically, who started the JP Morgan company and launched the financial railroads. They bought AT&T, General Electric, GM, DuPont. So now you can see where JP Morgan came in and started to invest in buying these companies.
Monopolize, pretty much, right?
Monopolize, which is what Jackson didn't want. That's why I think for quite a while, when he said, you know, vote for me, none of this. So it was Morgan who created the first steel corporation, which was the first billion-dollar corporation. You know, and what I learned from this is the power that JP Morgan had and still has. And the Rockefellers tend to be very quiet and in the distance.
Yeah.
But JP Morgan is right out there. I mean, they were one of the banks that got investigated and fined for Jeffrey Epstein.
I mean,
but they're still
same with like
rolling.
the Rothschilds kind of like hide in the background until they burn alive and, you know, a 33-minute fire.
Yes. Yeah.
And that gets a little headline news.
We'll have to do a little deep show on the on the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, because we know that name, but I'd like to learn more about like who they are, and they're actually almost all related. They're all related to something. So, but it was Morgan in 1907. Remember that once when they had that bank run and that crash that got people scared again, which basically set everything in motion. So they were just like, okay, there's a crisis, and we need to now start redrafting this Federal Reserve.
Yep, Hegelian dialectic, right?
That was it. Non-elected motherfutches. They just need to establish a central bank with different interests and pushing new ideas. And again, because people were suffering, they're like, okay, it's time we try this again. So again, crisis. What's that saying, Greg? About,
crisis, reaction, solution. Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Never. So like in 1910, they drafted the proposal, and believe it or not, Congress voted it out. So Congress didn't like it in 1910. So between 1910 and 1913, they went back, rewrote it. But I'm wondering if some money was now starting to slide underneath the table because Congress said no to this Federal Reserve, and it wasn't changed very much. So 3 years later, something happened.
Okay.
3 years later, something happened. They were very, it just.
Well, and you never know. I mean, because you're dealing with occultists too. I mean, the founding fathers were all Freemasonic, and I'm sure you had ton of Freemasonic kind of influences driving. When should we design these things to happen? When do the stars say that we should align and bring this thing into fruition? People believe that shit, right? The billionaires study the stars.
Yeah, definitely. And they do everything decades ahead, decades ahead. When it comes to this New World Order, whatever you want to call it,
the plan,
this plan that they put into place, which really started when the reserve happened, and you basically, 1913 is when it came on board. They agreed, they signed on, but when they signed on, like I said earlier, Congress can't do anything about it. The president couldn't do anything about it. They gave this private entity with the name Federal Reserve, federal, which had nothing to do with being federal, complete carte blanche to everything. And within 10 years, they already had problems because they were issuing a lot of money, and they had the stock exchange. And again, the whole stock exchange, the whole stock market, it's in my opinion, it's a Ponzi scheme. It all runs on speculation. You're speculating whether a company would do well or not. And that's when they had the big market crash of 1929, which was disastrous. But I always felt every time there's a disaster, that's when they have to reset or reform something. And basically in the early 1930s, it's when they're like, you can't have gold anymore. And the government basically was buying gold, told people, you got to give us your gold. We'll buy it from you at 30 to 50% less. And that's how they took people's gold. They were taking people's gold in the 1930s, where they're like, no, we need it. We're shortage. We can't be. And I'm like, this is crazy. So now we're in part two, which is the scam.
Okay,
so the scam really started with the stock market crash in 1929. We're taking the gold and we're going to literally pay you pennies on the dollar for it. And when people are struggling and basically they were forced. It's from what I was reading, they were forced to be like, yeah, all right, here you go. It's very, very scary, So some of the basic questions we need to ask is how the Federal Reserve works, who owns it, how is it controlled, and how's the legislation put through. So when it comes down to one thing, question is, basically a very difficult question for people to answer because it's shrouded in back then in secrecy. This idiotic cartoon videos, they talk about it. They always dumb it down. And I've got a couple videos to explain, what I mean by that. They use this very legal jargon that is confusing. That's why you have to hire a lawyer or accountant, because you can't figure out half the thing that these guys are saying. They always use these cutesy childish cartoons to basically talking down to us, describing the Federal Reserve, how it works. This is just a way to numb and dumb us, and then the truth is we can't explain it because money really right now doesn't come from anywhere. Like you could say treasury and bonds and how they can sell treasury and sell bonds, and that's how you buy it. So basically the money that they have is coming from us.
Yeah.
Any money they collect from taxes. And by the way, the only reason why they liberated women to join the workforce, it's not to liberate women. It was, hey, we're not able to tax half the population.
Exactly.
So
let's increase the workforce so that way we can increase the money coming in, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we can't explain, why money is just printed like this, out of thin air. We talk all the time amongst my friends where I'm like, money is fake, but this is what we're going to talk about now. So we're going to play video number 1, the cartoon video. So if you want to play that one, Greg.
The Fed, then and now, combines centralized national authority through the Board of Governors, remember that on the map, with a healthy dose of regional independence through the reserve banks. A third entity, the Federal Open Market Committee, brings together the expertise of the first two in setting the nation's monetary policy.
Precisely what imaginary gaggle of school children is this economic gibberish aimed at?
They just basically, government says we need money. They go to these private people. So they come to Greg and I. Greg and I are like, here you go. It's not backed by anything, because in the one video, the guy talks about how the Federal Reserve has not had gold since 1934, which is, again, around the time they took it from everybody.
During the crisis or any time that you're aware of, has the Federal Reserve or Treasury participated in any gold swaps arrangements?
The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934. So we have not engaged in any gold swaps.
But it appears on your balance sheet that you hold gold.
What appears on our balance sheet is gold certificates. When we turned before 1934, the Federal Reserve did own gold. We turned that over by law to the Treasury and received in return for that gold certificate.
If the Treasury entered into, because under the Exchange Stabilization Fund, I would assume they probably have the legal authority to do it. They wouldn't be able to do it then because you have the securities for essentially all the gold?
No, we have no interest in the gold that is owned by the Treasury. We have simply an accounting document that is called gold certificates that represents the value at a statutory rate
and still
that we gave to the Treasury in 1930.
And still measured at $42 an ounce, which makes no sense whatsoever.
So majority of our money is not even in circulation.
Mm-hmm.
A majority of money is not in circulation, which is what causes inflation. Which is what the situation is now. So inflation can happen when prices are getting too high, or you're printing too much money, which is what happened during COVID. All these governments just printed all this money, which we were all like, oh, please help us, government. So again, now we are like, oh, we need help from the government.
Dude, and that's exactly, in Trump's last year during COVID, the CARES Act was one of the largest spending bills ever.
Yes.
And it added so much money to our national debt.
Trillions.
Right? And so you have, like you said, there's two things that have to happen. There has to be an increase in the money supply, which is what the CARES Act did. It printed a shitload of money. And you have to have inflation or prices go up, right? So when he gets back in, he's promising tariffs. Yep. What happens when you implement tariffs? The price goes up. Yep. So you're going to have inflation. You're going to have prices go up. He's flooding the money market with all of these dollar bills. So it's creating this recipe for disaster. And that's why I'm asking, is an economic crash coming? Is Donald Trump allowing it to happen in order to bring in this new type of currency?
Well, we're already in it. We're already in it. The U.S. dollar is about 97% less value since 1971. So when they came off the gold standard, which I find very strange, because in that one video that I'll send you that we could play just before this, the gentleman's talking is being asked, and again, when they go to testify, it's testifying. So Congress can't touch these people, but he's asked, how much gold do we have? And basically they go, we don't know how much gold we have. We have gold receipts.
Right.
We have gold
Yeah.
certificates. And they're like, what do you mean gold certificates? And it's basically, here's an IOU. And what had happened is when people would take their gold to the bank and say, we need you to store this because, people would get robbed, people didn't really have safes back in the day. They just put it in a potato sack and hide it under their house and stuff like that. They noticed that less than 10% of those people would come back without their receipt when they're asking for their gold. They're like, hey, these people aren't even asking for the receipt. They don't even know how much they have anymore or whatever. So immediately the lights turned on going, oh, if less than 10% are asking, then we can just start handing out these gold certificates. And that's basically what it is. It's just a certificate saying, oh, yeah, you gave us your gold. No worries. We have it here.
It's like if you give them,
us.
you give them
It's
10 bars,
transparency.
right?
Yeah.
You give them 10 bars of gold, and they give you a receipt saying you only give them 6.
And that started the whole debt system of, 90% of the money supplied is created as loans for people to pay back in interest. So couple of if you want to play the next video called fractional banking. Sure. Before we play that, I'll just quickly explain fractional banking is again, this is a concept that banks use where we always would hear the banks don't have their own money. They have your money. And then this video will explain to you how it's lent out.
So if you deposit $10,000 into the bank sets aside 10% or $1,000 and then loans out the rest of your money. The way it works is, say another person comes into the bank and asks for a car loan of $9,000. At this moment, the bank loans out the $9,000 from your original deposit. It isn't there anymore. The borrower then pays the person selling the car, and they go deposit the money into another bank, which is part of the same central banking system. This $9,000 is treated as a new deposit, and the process continues. The money gets redeposited and reloaned until the initial deposit of $10,000 becomes $100,000. The banking system just created $90,000 by loaning out your money. Apparently it began with the goldsmiths in the 17th century when people were trading in gold. Gold was heavy to carry around, so people stored the actual metal in vaults and traded receipts instead. Those receipts were the first paper money. Since only a few people would withdraw their gold at any given time, the vault owners, basically the new bankers, began creating receipts for more metals than they actually held. They loaned out those receipts and charged interest on money.
It's a big old scam.
It's just a scam. So basically, they're just creating money.
Yeah, they're creating little paper that means nothing, and you're giving them the gold.
So commercial banks basically create sort of like a checkbook money. Whenever you want a loan, it's granted to you. It's simply added as in deposit as debt. So that's why I always found interesting is like when a bank is loaning you money, they own the debt, not you, because they're promising you they have the money. You never see the money.
Right.
You never see the money. They're promising the money. So really the debtee is them, not you. And I think it's gotten to the point now that the collapse is inevitable. It's been, Greg, it's there. I'm surprised it's being propped up. And the reason why is it's not in the news. They're not talking about it. They're not talking about the BRICS nations, which basically in 2008, certain countries like China and Russia and India were like, we're going to start our own currency or trade with their own currency.
Was
which
that
is what
in
every country should-
2008 they started this, or
2008 is when they started. There's rumblings, and it happened to be the same time that Bitcoin and crypto was starting, which is very interesting. So around that
Bitcoin,
time,
yeah, just got over $100,000. So
well, that's it. And they were talking about it. So when people are like, what's the BRICS nations? It's basically other countries giving the US government, the FU, saying, we're not going to use your dollar anymore because it's tied to oil. And that's how they stronghold and bully countries, using that fiat dollar that's tied to oil. So you can't do anything if you can't trade with the United States. And they're like, you're tied to oil. You haven't shown us the gold. They haven't even done an audit of the Fort Knox since the 60s. There's that video that either we've seen or we'll see where the guy basically says, oh, we don't have gold. We haven't had gold since the 1934.
Not only that, but if you look at every war that the United States gets into, I mean, every country that we go to war with is a country that's not controllable by a bank, right? The Rothschilds banks.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got Russia that kicked out the Rothschilds and bank. So you have these countries that want nothing to do with central bank system anymore. And more countries are joining and applying to join for the BRICS nations, which basically saying we want our money to be an even playing field, because the US dollar is always much higher.
Yep.
And, like our Canadian dollar is just crap. But you can't have a dollar that's really since 1971 has lost 90+% of its value, and being backed by gold, being backed by minerals, gold and silver. So I found that interesting because I look at it as one side of the world is going to have their system, and the Western world, which unfortunately is U.S. and Canada, is going to try to stick to this system, which is failing. It's not failing; it's failed. It's done.
Right.
It's done. And the fact that this is not in the news, where I'm watching more and more nations come on board and say, F you to the US dollar.
Yeah, it's to keep everybody distracted. You know what I mean? Like, why would they want to tell everybody, hey, all hell's going to break loose, you're not going to have any money?
Yeah.
That doesn't make people happy.
It doesn't. And they don't want what happened back in the day when you had up to 30,000 different types of currencies, and you had each state having their different currency within a country.
Yeah.
They want to have their way of trading evenly their currency, that it's backed by something, that it's not. These countries know that this money is just printed out of air, which I find interesting now because Trump has come in and has put a gun to their head and says there's going to be 100% tariffs on you guys, whoever's in the BRICS nations. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
So Trump, to do that, has to restart or crash something.
Right. And you were speaking of crashes, and like the last real crash that we had was in 2008. I mean, before COVID, right? Because COVID was like a crash in itself.
Yeah.
But you have a video here on mortgage and the funds games with mortgages. So I'm wondering, like, how does that
play
tie
that? We can go through each video now.
Okay.
But play that video and again understand what I was saying about how when you're given a loan, the bank is saying we have the money, trust us, here it is. So they are the debtor or dettee. Not sure which one is which, but this video will explain basically with mortgages.
Gotcha.
The little game they play.
All right, here we go.
I didn't know at the time that when you apply for a mortgage, the money does not exist in an account before you sign the mortgage documents. I thought that it was a transfer of money that the bank already had pre-existing my mortgage contract. Well, when I found out that was not the case, it was quite shocking. For me anyway. I mean, it might not be shocking for other people, but for me, that was really quite shocking because I'd rested my entire premise on the belief that a mortgage company must have something to lend before they lend it. Well, they don't. And that something is money. It's actually created upon the strength of my signature, which creates a promissory note, which they accept for value and create the credit that becomes my mortgage or my loan or my credit card.
That is the genius behind the evil of these banking systems. It's like, hey, let's convince people that we have a lot of money. And that way, if they want to come get out their money, because they know that not everybody's going to ask for their money at the same time, right? And that's how this works with the fractional banking system is as long as you keep that threshold of the daily allowable requested money under a certain limit, everything's going to be hunky-dory. But as soon as you have a crisis where everybody's asking for their money, you can't give it to them, you shut your doors down, they lose confidence in you, people are going to start rioting, dude.
And that's happened over in Europe. That happened just recently this year. A lot of people were doing what they call bank run. So a bank run is when you all of us go to the bank and said, "Where's my money? Where's my money?" And because of the fractional banking, the fact that they're like, "Oh, the 100,000 you gave us, well, we lent out 900,000, so we don't really have that money." That's when banks started to fail, and we're starting to see smaller banks and credit unions. The bank, Silicon Bank, that happened, that collapsed just recently. There are all these banks that are collapsing, which is scary. And again, it's only on the news for like one day or a half a news cycle. Where like, this is extremely important. You got the one side of the world saying we're not wanting the U.S. dollar, and we're saying F off to it. And then on our side, the Western side, which I feel is the side that's going to try to keep the fiat dollar. I don't know how they're going to do it, because really the value of the U.S. dollar has crumbled to 97% less value than it had in 71. Where is all the gold? But again, that's why I've heard the Vatican stolen all the gold. The royal families, all these rich companies.
Well, not only that, but like I heard a big theory about the Grand Canyon has a boatload of gold, and they wouldn't want people to, like, they stopped extracting gold out of there because you flood the market with gold, the price of gold goes down, and they don't want that. So there is a boatload of gold out there, and I'm just curious, if they bring back the gold standard, do they go and mine that gold out of the Grand Canyon?
I feel even without the gold that's in there, they have enough gold to pay off. They have enough gold, silver, diamonds, minerals to pay off all the debts of every country. From what I'm hearing, with these very well-off, the bloodline families, the families that we've never even talked about, the Orzini family.
Yeah, all the eeny weenies, tiny
all
peenies.
the eeny weeny, tiny weenies,
there
tiny
you go.
weenies. Money can't buy you schlong dong.
That's true.
But I feel, because when I was, I gotta have another pen here. Sorry, guys. Ooh. Oh, okay. There we go. I have to calm myself down because I want to just reach out and grab somebody and strangle them and go, come on. If everybody woke up at the same time, this shit would end in 90 days. This stuff would be cleared out and new stuff, which again is the promise of what Trump is going to do. There's always this promise of Nasara and Jassara, which again is this whole national system where all the debts nationally and worldwide, internationally and nationally are cleared. I know you talked about last week. You said you think that the crypto or Bitcoin is going to pay off the U.S. Debt.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that,
which makes sense.
Well, I don't know how it logistically happens, but you know, you're seeing predictive programming of this kind of stuff happen where it's not purposeful. So in Mr. Robot, I don't know if you ever watched that, but in season 1, I mean, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, he basically wipes out the debt of everybody in the United States. So it is a hacker who hacks into the system and says, debt zero for everybody. And now if that happens, all of a sudden, think about it. If a hacker hacks into the United States, whatever, all of these banks, clears everybody's debt, no one owns a penny, all of a sudden, what happens to the banks? Right? They lose a lot of money. I mean, you have to look at the confidence of the dollar. Maybe the dollar drops. I don't know. Because if the debt goes away, I mean, you'd think that the dollar that way would be strengthened. But for some reason, I feel like you'd have a panic in all of these banks and they would stop loaning out money. They would shut their doors. That would be like a spark that could generate, hey, we need to come up with a new income source now, like a monetary source.
They actually started some banks not lending out money. So when COVID happened, and being a trainer and I'm in film, there was no work, and literally 80, 90 grand in 2 years. Like I lost about $40 to $45,000 each year. That's not after my savings had gone. I had to go and take a second mortgage on my home.
Gotcha.
And because my bank wouldn't even give me a line of credit, they couldn't extend my line of credit because they said, we're not doing that right now because the uncertain. This is before interest rates went up. Once interest rates went up, I actually remember getting a email from the lender for my second mortgage had said, we're not giving out loans at this time. So they stopped giving out loans because what you just said there, right? Uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty. So that's the reason why I sold my house, paid everything off, said, screw it. Not done with the system. I didn't want to have a mortgage again. Mortgage is called death grip. If you look up what mortgage is called, it's called a death grip. Interest rates are illegal. So that's why I think Trump is trying to bring, that's right. Trump is trying to bring, my thumbs ups, Trump is trying to bring credit cards down to 10%. The IRS is a privately owned company. And I try to find this video, Greg, and I'll still look for it. But there's this very famous video I saw 15, 20 years ago where they only got half of the states to sign off on this income tax. And it was supposed to be voluntary companies doing it first, then it moved to the citizens. And they didn't get all the states. I think there was 21 states, like 11 or 8 signed off to it. Don't quote me with these numbers, but it was like 1/3 of the states signed off. And that's why there's people in certain states that are saying, I don't have to pay income tax. And in this video, they had someone from the IRS say they were one of the departments in the IRS was asked, if you guys can figure the loophole around this, $50,000 bonus, and they couldn't. I don't really want to find this video because this guy said, when I realized that we couldn't and what we're doing to people, half that team quit. Half of them quit because they're like, there is no way that this is legal if they're going to tell us, give us 50 grand if you can figure out how to get around it.
Well, dude,
and it's no different with mortgages.
Yeah, I mean, the banking system is a big old fraud, dude. And like this one video that you sent me, it actually made a lot of sense. And I liked how they put it together. It was about like the lending and then how much you owe in interest. You know what I mean? How much you make in interest, but then how much they charge. And it's like, wait a second. So I do want to play this one real quick here. This one's the cartoon banking.
The little cartoon. Again, right? It's a cartoon, right?
Yeah, right? They got to teach you. But this one's actually good. This one kind of wakes you up here. So check it out.
It does.
Hello, bank. I'd like to deposit $1,000 into my savings, please. Why, of course. We'll keep this perfectly safe for you. And for trusting us, we'll pay you 0.03% in interest. Sweet. Thanks. Hey, bank. I was wondering if I could borrow some money for school. Yeah, of course. How much do you need? Just $1,000. Oh. Well, we just so happen to have $1,000 right here. Here you go. But remember, you have to pay us 7% in interest for letting you borrow our money. Okay, that's fine. Thanks. Hey, bank, here's your money back along with the extra $70 to cover the interest. Great. Thank you. Hey, bank, can I withdraw my money from my savings account, please? Yes, of course. Here you are, perfectly safe, just like how you left it. Oh, and I completely forgot. Your interest for saving your money with us. Wait, hold on. You guys are only giving me 30 cents when you used my money to lend it to the other guy and you guys made $70 off of him? Yep, that's how the banking system works.
So, I mean, it's just, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's just like, wait a second. Because the interest that they give you for storing your money there is so freaking low, dude. Like 0.35% or something like that. Sometimes it's, 1 or 2%.
And it has to be because they're lending it out for 8, 9, 10, 15%. So the lower they can give you, that margin, that profit margin is huge.
Exactly.
They wouldn't give you 4 and lend it out for 4 or for 8 because they're only making 4.
Yeah.
They'll give you 2%, 3 if you're good.
Yeah.
But it's nowhere near that unless it's a GIC or a treasury bond. And they'll loan it out for 8, 9, 10, 15%, especially in my sense, what I needed a second mortgage. And that's basically the trick, man, the scam. That's the scam.
It is a scam.
It is a scam. And if you play the next one, I called out the flip out. So this is a politician who basically just flips out and says, "This is circular. This is corrupt. We're just chasing tails here."
So do you want me to play the first one? Right up at the bald guy, the banking system.
Yeah, which one is that? Yeah,
because there's two flip outs.
Oh, is there? Okay.
But I'll play this first one. We'll see how this goes.
Well, I'm a bank, Brian,
This
and
one's a
I
joke.
borrow
This is a
money
skit.
and I lend it out, and I charge more to the people I'm lending it to than I pay to the people from whom I'm borrowing it.
Well, who do you borrow money from?
Well, from, depositors, Brian. Have you got $1?
Well,
I borrow your $1 and I give you, there's your bank balance.
$1?
$1.
Right, okay, and you pay interest to me on that?
I do, but I also charge you fees.
Well, why do you charge me fees?
Because, Brian, I'm looking after your money. Your money is secure with me. I'm a bank. I mean, this is a very important amount of money. This is probably your nest egg. It's safe with us.
And how much interest do you pay me?
Approximately the same as I'm charging you in fees.
Oh, good deal for me.
Well, your money's secure with us, Brian, and I then lend that money to businesses, and those businesses generate income. This is how we build an economy.
Yeah. And they put that income into the bank?
They do, of course, Brian, and that builds the savings pool, and we can invest more money.
Well, who do you lend that to?
Well, to people who need credit, Brian. You see, money creates more money, so if we can create money that creates more money, we're broadening the economy, we're expanding it all the time. Yes.
But shouldn't people just buy the can afford?
You don't need to afford the things you're buying, Brian. You need to afford the interest on the money you need to borrow in order to buy them.
Do people need to be buying these things that they can't
obviously
afford?
they think so, Brian. I mean, these things are advertised to people as very necessary, very important, and deeply, deeply attractive.
Well, who's advertising things that people don't need?
The companies we're lending the money to.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like, yes, the amount of interest that you get is roughly the amount that they charge you in fees, right? So it's like you're basically doing a wash right there.
Yeah.
And two, he said it like perfectly. I know this whole thing was a skit, but it's like you don't have to afford the things you're buying. You have to afford the amount of interest that you have to pay in order to purchase this object.
Right. So that video was a skit. The next one is the flip. So this one here is actually a politician over in England, probably doing some kind of, testimony to something or whatever. Anyways, this
It
is
looks
a good
like,
video 'cause-
honestly, it looks like he's standing up in one of those worldwide like forums where they all get the world leaders together, right?
Yeah,
but
like when the G7 nations get together and they just bitch about shit.
And he's standing up exposing the central bank scam.
Yeah.
Here we go.
It is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money. And yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. The sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
Hear ye! Hear ye!
Hear ye! Shenanigans, LIBOR.
Chivalry is dead. No, like his whole point on quantitative easing too is like they changed the verbiage on all these things, like you were saying, reform, quantitative easing. It's like when you hear that, you're like, what kind of math are they doing? What is this nonsense? It's printing more money. quantitative easing is printing more money.
If they can just print money, then why do you need to charge tax? And I think now, just to finalize the show, and we can talk a little bit about when you said you think the collapse that's going to happen, you think the big thing that's going to happen is the financial system's going to change. And I think that's where, we're going to see Trump try to or put forward the idea of no income tax. We can have tariffs to pay for it because countries, especially the US and Canada, are very rich in their minerals and oil and gold, that you wouldn't have to charge tax. But that can't work when you have a greedy bunch of MFers sitting up top for the last century being like, hey, that means we have to really have the money and we're not going to make the profits that we make. And we can't just print money out of air, which is basically what they're doing. And if that's the case, then why are citizens paying taxes? And we're at the situation now where I actually thought it was going to collapse before Trump got in. But again, I agree with you, Greg. I think they're going to use some type of crypto or Bitcoin to offset or pay down the U.S. debt. But that doesn't take the debt away from people. So if interest rates, which they have said has been illegal for years, I have some people in our private group that keeps talking about Nassar and Jassar, where you just get rid of debt. I said, well, you can't just get rid of your house. You still borrow that money. What they could do is all the interest that you paid, you get back. So I paid $250,000 with an interest owning my house for 10 plus years. That's where I would get that money back. But I would still have a loan. So when people are talking about Nassar and Jassar, we should do a show on that at some point too, because it's very interesting to see how a lot of it's talked in the number 17, the Q posts, and
it actually isn't.
Is it?
Yeah, because I've read all of the Q stuff, and they never talk about Nassar.
Yeah.
It's basically just made up by people in that community.
Okay.
Same thing with JFK's alive. JFK Jr. is alive.
What?
That's all people in the.
He's alive,
right?
Is he not going to be? Is he not going to be like vice
the VP?
president?
Yeah, he's a VP candidate. Yeah, JD Vance is out. JFK Jr. is actually alive. He's coming back. He's going to be the vice president. But that's like the QAnon nonsense. That's the stuff that was actually introduced to whitewash this whole Q stuff because it makes it look like nonsense now, right?
Well, it is. It is nonsense. And, part of where my head was at a few years ago is I really thought this Nassar Jassar system of some type was going to come in because part of Trump taking out the cabal and deep state and the globalist is taking on the biggest head, I believe, of the snake, which is the financial system. Because once that is gone, and you could see every time it did run out, their charter did
thumbs up again, dude.
The charter did run out. Whatever.
Oh, don't do your Illuminati heart.
Yes, my Illuminati heart. Then they would figure this out. U.S. would be okay, but then a war would start, would diminish it. So there was only a time during Jackson's time that there was no debt. Other than that, the entire world and countries have debt, and you have countries lending money to other countries that have debt, and you're like, but if they can't pay back the money,
it's like a mob, dude. You're like a mob. But like,
how am I going to pay that money that Greg lent me and stuff like that? So if you want to play the last video just for fun,
yes,
I think it's a little skit, which is basically what I just talked about.
Dude, I had to watch this. I had to watch this like 3 times, and I'm like, wow, this is a genius skit. These guys are freaking.
It is
the Three Stooges.
It is.
All right, let's do this.
God bless them.
And speaking of money, how about the $20 you owe me?
Oh, yeah? Well, I only got 10, so here's 10, I owe you 10.
Thanks. Hey, Mo, you owe me 20. Well, here's 10, I'll owe you 10.
You owe me 20.
Here's 10, I owe you 10.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you.
Here's the 10 I owe you. Good, now we're all even.
Done and done. Right? It's just $10. Let's wipe it around.
I mean, that's the most basic way to look at it, but that's basically what's happening.
That's liquid money right there.
That's just liquid money. And I'm laughing because it's funny, but I'm not laughing because this is society cannot ever move forward and be free of this slavery. I don't care if they expose 9/11. I don't care if they expose the jab. I don't care if they expose we've never been to the moon, or if the earth is flat or
Right.
not, or Epstein. This needs to be exposed to the point where people are like, no, thank you.
Yes. No, and I want to touch on that because that is why all of these things are brought up as problems. The Hegelian dialectic is, let's create these side problems. We'll create the reaction to it, right? Epstein, QAnon, child trafficking, everything else that you can think of with the elite, the Illuminati, shit that we talk about on this show, right?
Yeah.
It's all a distraction from the main thing that controls you, which is the monetary system. Now, when Trump tries to resolve this and brings in another system, you would think that the people at the top, like the deep state, who has all of the current money, wouldn't want Trump to do that because he's taking away their power, right? So why is Trump still alive? That always is the age-old question that I will continue to ask people, is if he is such a threat to this entire system, from the top on down, that has all of the power, all the control, all the money, why is he alive?
I personally think the real Trump's been gone for a bit. I think he's been gone for a bit. I think when he got COVID and he came back, I think that's when they switched him out. Listen, this is why we have this show. I can say whatever I want, folks. That's where my head's at. It may not be that exact moment, but he has gotten older. He's lost a little weight. He looks a little different. But I feel maybe the original Trump was the guy to get us into the new era, was the guy that was going to save the world. There's just too much tied to him now, and I know a lot of our followers that do like Trump still are like, and I'm like, listen, it's too convenient because the dude is still around, and he didn't get shot at. Like let's stop with that nonsense. Maybe there was a real gun and they killed that poor innocent guy.
Well, yeah,
but
then
he didn't get shot at. Don't even start.
And when you talk about when you see these events and people die, like, it makes it more believable. And yes, we talked about this with PJ and the Illuminati card game. It's like, if they did a false flag event to, bomb a building like 9/11, the frickin' Pearl Harbor, and yes, people died, but what did it do? It was for a greater cause in their book, right? It got them into war. It got them to spend money. It got them to frickin' create weapons, military or industrial complex. So for the greater thing that what Trump is part of, why would he care about a couple people's lives? You know what I mean? Like, they're all expendable. We are all expendable to this whole plan. And that's where everybody has to be like, what? Yeah, because he doesn't care if anybody dies. Like, I don't want to say like he's a, blah, 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 but
he doesn't.
Compared to like what he is here to do.
Yeah.
Like, he would have been dead a long time ago if he was against the deep state. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. I think it was, we need to repackage and rebrand how we call ourselves the New World Order. I think, COVID was a test run, and it was more to see how many people would follow orders, which is basically the one guy from the WEF is like, it was an exercise in
they admitted
following
it.
orders.
Not only that, but it was a big transfer of wealth. It was a way to funnel the money into the people who have all the control already, and just say, okay, count all your money. Let's get it all in order. Like, who cares if these peons have any of the remnants out there? We have the bolus of the money here. Let's do an exchange on the side, because I feel like they're going to have an exchange before the public is aware of this exchange, right?
Oh, for sure. And I feel what had happened is they are, through COVID and the transfer of wealth, all the money that they're giving to Ukraine, all the money that every government gives to other countries, it's laundered. There's no accountability to any of that. So now I think they're laundering it to get as much as they can so they can bank that money and buy crypto, right? So they know the dollar's dying. It can barely last every 50 years, the new the fiat system. There is talk about going back to the gold standard. But I just don't see it as them giving us freedom.
Yeah.
Because that will change everything.
But even Bitcoin, I mean, digital dollar is the gateway to a social credit score system, everybody. Like, don't buy Bitcoin. Don't buy freaking digital dollar. That's like the worst thing that we can do. And
it's
Trump
all
is
speculative.
all about it.
Everything's speculative. Like they're like, this coin, there's only 21 trillion or billion dollars worth of it. I'm like, where is this coin? There's a video of Trump I've seen in the past where he's like, if you knew who created or started Bitcoin, you'd be shaking your head. Like he was not into it. But
now
this
he's
one
taking
That's why,
he's taking credit
that's
for
why,
it.
That's it. That's why I think this dude's been swapped out, you know?
Well, or he's
know.
been taken over. Like maybe he's been possessed by a specific antichrist spirit. Who the hell knows? But like the crypto dollar is just as bad as the fiat dollar, but it's worse. I'd say it's worse because it's traceable, it's trackable. They can turn it off with a click of a button. They could take it from you. So, I mean, if you do something wrong, if you speak out against Elon Musk, if you speak out against, it's just like social media. They can ban your account. They can ban your bank account, right?
And honestly, guys, they could do that now. We've seen, whether it's true or not, we've seen stars like Ye or what's his name, Kanye West. They, stop banking with them. Certain banks said to Trump, you can't bank with us anymore.
But I mean, if
they can shut that shit down.
If you really wanted to, you could take all your money out and store it underneath your mattress or in a closet.
I'm going to right after. Well, banks closed now.
But if you have crypto, you can't store that. That's like made up like Nintendo money. You know what I mean? Like that's a video game.
Yeah, same with buying gold. Unless you're actually getting the gold bars, they're giving you a gold certificate, right? Like, here it is. Here's your certificate of authenticity. So I want to see the gold. I want to have right here my 3 bars of gold right there. Boom, boom, boom. Style that. That's not how it really works. So it'll be very interesting to see how the countries are getting out of debt, because they're just printing and giving away money like as if they know it's their last run.
Yeah.
And things are going to change and they're going to go into hiding, or it's their last run. They're trying to get as much as they can so they can buy themselves some $20 glasses at the gas station.
There we go. Money green glasses, baby.
Bling, bling, bling. Ring, ring, ring. This
Awesome.
is nickel and dime. Nickel and dime.
They nickel and dime you, everybody. And hey, Flex, great research, dude. I know there's like so many different topics that stem off of this because like the Titanic, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, just the Illuminati. I mean, we could go for on and on and on and on.
Yeah, and there's episodes in there that we can definitely go into. But I think that's where people get lost a lot, is when they want to watch a video or documentaries on it. There's a lot of dates and names, and it's like, listen, let's just I didn't want to dumb it down, but I had to.
Yeah.
Even just for my processing. But I just realized years ago, stuff's not adding up. I really realized the last 4 years, nothing's adding up, and we're in a situation now that this perpetrating this golden age, cheerleading, a year, 2 years ago would have gotten me excited, but I woke up a little bit to what's going on. Same with Greg, we're both kind of like using our discernment. I haven't used that word in a while, but using your discernment, and things might be good for a while. Maybe Trump does the things we need to do, stops income tax completely, gets rid of all these things. But down the road, you got to sell your soul to, hey, you got to sign up for this to get it. You got to, if you want, basic universal income, yes, please, I'd take it. I'd be like, of course.
Dude.
Maybe it's not a chip under my skin, but it's something.
We just talk, like in the golden age, when people die, they become demons. If you're going to sell your soul so that way you can make money and trade, you're going to become a demon. I hate to say it, but hey. So anyway, good show, dude. Everybody out there, if you like this episode, hit the thumbs up, share the episode, go over to Apple iTunes, leave a rating, leave a review. Helps the show grow on iTunes as well. So yeah, everybody else, stay steamy. Flex, any last words?
No, I got nothing to say other than hold on to your money, honey, and don't trust anybody.
There it is. All right. Well, until next time, stay steamy, everybody.